Whether it be my story or my guest stories, we all share parts of the human experience. In our own ways, we have all faced triumph and challenges, both joy and pain, both gratitude and grief. My life changed forever on October 11, 2019, the day I had a stroke. It had a ripple effect, not only for me, but also for those I cherish. Through grace, we are here today to pay it forward. It's my mission to focus on what brings us together and help people find their path through life stories. Veterans are heroes, and often our soldiers come back and suffer silently. After returning from the war, Melissa's struggles with PTSD and alcohol paved a difficult path for her. Melissa has managed to turn her life around, and her story is like nothing you have ever heard before. Melissa, I always say everybody has a story. You have a multitude of stories in your young life. So, are you from Denver?
I'm not from Denver. I originally was born in Landstuhl, Germany. Mm-hmm. Both of my parents were in the Army in the 80s, and so spent a lot of time in and out of different Army bases on the west coast of California and Nevada. Okay,
and how did you end up in Colorado?
Okay, so I have some distant family members who live here that I was close with, in and out of childhood, just because of the way I was raised. I didn't really have a ton of connections.
I'm going to poke at you along the way. A ton of connections as in family or?
Family.
Okay.
Family, like outside family. Yeah. So I was, we'll probably circle back to this, but as part of my Air Force career, I spent the last year of my military service in Travis Air Force Base in California. Mm-hmm. So when I was getting out, things were hectic and I needed a change. I knew I needed to change my life. So I had a friend in Atlanta that I almost moved in with. And then I had my, my second cousin aunt type person.
Twice removed.
Yeah, who said like, hey, like you can come, move out here to Colorado, get your stuff together and, start over. And so that was 10 years ago. And so I came like a lot of people who come here and I just never left.
Okay. So were you in the service in California or here?
California. Okay. Yeah.
And what made you join the service?
So I joined the Air Force because I wanted to kind of like escape, like get away from my life. I even like graduated high school a semester early because I was just like done being a child. I was just like ready to take care of my own stuff. Mm-hmm. And being in the military is like just a, quick way to do that. And so I joined the Air Force. I had pretty good grades and good scores on the different placement tests. And so I joined the Air Force. And
you're going to fly away, right?
Yeah. Well, that's people always ask me like, did you fly planes? And I'm like, no, like 75% of the Air Force is not flying.
Oh my gosh, don't burst my bubble. Okay, and tell me about your experience while you're in the service.
So initially I signed up to be security forces, which is kind of like, how could I describe it? Law enforcement and protection of assets, big and small, deadly and benign. So my first base I was stationed at was in Incirlik, Turkey. So I was there for about a year and a half. And it was actually one of the most fun experiences of my life. I think of it as like my college experience because we were living in dorms. It was a bunch of us 18-year-old idiots. They let us, drink at 18 on the base. And so we were just wild. And we were right on the Mediterranean Sea in southern Turkey by a city called Adana. And so I had a lot of fun while I was there. But as far as the job specifically, it was always very stressful just because you're dealing with, I'm carrying a weapon. I'm on alert for different things happening or not happening. So it was stressful from the beginning.
So on alert from the town, from the base, from intelligence?
Yeah, so town, intelligence, the base, and then you have to make sure that Air Force individuals themselves are behaving within a certain parameter. So you're not very liked as a career
The
field.
narc, yeah.
Yeah, because you're the police of the base. And so there's
Wow.
just, different layers of that.
Okay. And what kind of experience did you have when you came back from Turkey?
So when I came back from Turkey, I had this feeling just because of how fun Turkey was that nothing was ever going to be that exciting in my life. And then I went to...
Set the bar high, honey,
It was
right?
so high for so many years because of that wonderful, wild experience. But when I came back to the States, I was stationed at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
Was there for about a year. I had one of the airmen who was on duty while I was working drowned. While I was working, I'm trying to deal with all that. I had different people commit suicide in the base dorms. There was a ton of domestic violence going on.
Why?
Just because, if you just put a bunch of young people under enormous pressure, things just, we had no way of coping. So things just get out of hand. And I think that's why you see a lot of drama and violence and abuse going on, because young people are being placed under extreme amount of pressure and responsibility and just don't know how to wield that power properly.
And you as a young girl, how were you supposed to deal with that?
So I was doing really well till I wasn't. I had won a couple achievement medals for service, and so I was doing well. I excelled. I was promoted very quickly. So I was handling it properly until I wasn't. I went to Iraq in 2008, and I still did well over there. I got an achievement medal for my time in Iraq. But when I got back, I was in a class, just a leadership class. In the Air Force, you go through all these different trainings. There was the honor guard outside practicing and shot off their weapons, and I went under the table. And I had no idea. I was not the one who was going to get PTSD. I was good to go. And so it was just a slow descent from there. That's when my drinking really started at that point, to go to sleep. And, things just went off the rail pretty quickly.
Okay, so how many people in this world, in the service, do you think didn't realize that they had PTSD like you?
I think all of them. I don't think anyone ever joined thinking I'm going to go over here and then I'm going to get sick on purpose, or I'm going to try to fail at this duty that I've been, assigned with. So I think most people, I don't think anyone signed up. You sign up deciding okay, in my 18-year-old mind, I understand I'm laying my life on the line, whatever that could mean at 18. You're invincible. You think you'll never die anyway. So you can kind of agree to anything at that point.
And the recruiter endorses that.
Yes, yes. And there's utility in that, because there's a lot of things that need to happen, and a 30-year-old's not going to go through the same things that an 18-year-old would. So I understand the meta utility of the military and why young people have to go in. It's just, for me, I always felt like I signed up to give my life. I didn't know in what capacity it would be, whether it was giving my brain, giving my productivity. Even though I didn't physically die, I gave my life in a lot of other ways. So
when you signed up, you said, my body, my life versus my brain?
Right. There was just no concept of that. And then the epidemic of PTSD with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was happening then. Everybody was, the war was 2005. Everything was very hot, very, happening at that exact moment. So people didn't really start getting sick for years after that. No one really knew what was going on until after the fact.
Okay. Did one event or many events cause your PTSD?
So there's a lot of research that says like a stress threshold. So having, having a childhood that's really developmentally challenging or stressful, it kind of starts to wear down on your nervous system. So I think for me, it was multiple events that just created this straw that broke the camel's back kind of situation where maybe had I had a very, peaceful upbringing, and maybe that amount of stress would have been fine for me to deal with. But there were so many things. I mean, just the suicides. The one, if we try to narrow it down to one thing, I had a gentleman who would relieve me on post every morning in Iraq. Mm-hmm. He killed himself in a porta potty while we were working. And so it was bizarre because I felt like I was the only one reacting. Mm-hmm. We were on the bus and we were driving back to base to go work. And I'm just crying hysterically. Everybody else is fine. Nobody is, people are even saying things crazy like, he killed himself, like F him, different things like that. Wow. And I'm sitting here just crying hysterically. So that was probably, if I look back, that was probably the moment where I had just said, okay, this is all I can take. And then anything else that was building up on that became an issue. Okay. So
did you question like, okay, I'm bawling and nobody seems to care?
I did. I don't know if I questioned it, but I knew that it was wrong. Uh-huh. I knew that it was wrong that I was the only one on that bus bawling hysterically.
Okay. So did you have to relieve him?
Well, I didn't find his body. His team had found it. And the sick thing is just because of security and the way things work, clearances and all of that, they couldn't come clean up the body for days. So we were just driving past this porta potty where we knew he was in there and nobody could come clean it up for days.
Okay. So then day goes on. How long were you in Iraq?
So about 7 months.
And your duty was over?
For Iraq at the time I ended up, when I came back to the States, through all this, I was in school full time online while I was in Iraq. So I was still taking college classes while I was doing this. So I went right back into school when I came back. I was working on the base and then I would do school at night. And so I just picked up right where I left off and just kept going for it. Okay,
so there's a drive there, a theme.
Yes.
What was your drive?
The drive is to prove to all the people that, thought that I would be nothing. Uh-huh. So it's that created this kind of insatiable
I want more.
I want more, and I won't cease until, that happens.
And the I want more came at a cost of your mental health?
Absolutely.
Okay, so talk us through that.
Okay, so my mental health started to deteriorate in the fall of 2009. I started drinking at night mm-hmm. to be able to relax and go to sleep. And I didn't think it was anything more than that. Mm-hmm. So that stopped working, and I went to my primary care doctor and explained to him, like, I can't sleep. I have all this stuff to do. I was in LSAT prep course because I was like going to go to law school and do all these things. And I'm like, I can't sleep. I just need you to help me, figure out how I'm going to go to sleep. He goes, does bipolar run in your family? And I just flipped out. I was like, how dare you say that? And it does run in my family. Mm-hmm. So it was a very...
Did you know that at the time?
At the time, I did not know that I was, in fact, bipolar. Mm-hmm. Some people believe it can be brought on by stressful situations, and that's what happened to me with the PTSD feature to it. Nice flavor of PTSD with it. Mm. So
interesting choice of words. Okay.
And then so I had a psychotic break and I just lost it. I was just wandering around my squadron, going up to people saying really bizarre things. And so I was hospitalized and I was diagnosed.
Okay. So you walk out of the doctor's office and say, screw you, buddy, I don't have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you go home and continue to drink.
Yes, because I was like, okay, I know that's going to work. And then about a month later is when I had that break.
And where were you?
So I was in Arizona still. And it was just, it's so interesting. A lot of it is from like what I was told by like doctors and nurses. And then there's glimpses of like what I remember of, you know, walking up to my commanders and just saying like bizarre comments. And
do you remember like saying that?
I do, but I seem so detached from it that it didn't even feel like it was me.
And versus what would the doctors say?
Well, they said she has PTSD, she has bipolar, you have these things. But part of my mental health journey was the first 3 to 5 years is not even accepting that I had these conditions and just trying to somehow outdo them or somehow hope that they're going to go away.
Because you were an overachiever.
Right. And a lot of times, I know for me, being an overachiever, when you can't achieve something, you're like, what do I do? So you take up some kind of substance to numb that inadequacy. And so I started drinking very heavily at that time.
Okay. So the doctors showed you have a couple of years of screw them. I can cure myself.
Yep.
What happens in your life? Like denial? Do you go about your normal day?
It was denial. It was a series of like terrible, like half-hearted relationships. There was, luckily the military, they did a medical retirement versus like a discharge. So I was taken care of by the military and had health care and everything I needed. I always had a place to stay, always had food. So I didn't really have the same experience as a lot of veterans have. So I had this space to kind of fail on long term because I was being taken care of. And I think sometimes what happens is, so let me backtrack. What happened for me was I felt I had already done everything in my life. All the good stuff is done. All the great things I'll ever do are behind me.
How old are you?
24.
Okay.
24. And I succeeded greatly and then I failed greatly. And so I just kind of gave up for a while. I went to rehab a few times and it never really stuck. And then I came out to Colorado. So that was at the end of my Air Force career. And that was a time for me to try to really kind of get it together and get a hold of myself. It took a little bit longer. It took me, I started in culinary school, that didn't work out. It started in dental assisting school, that didn't work out. And so it's been a series of just trying to figure out what's gonna stick. And in between that time, dating somebody very casually, I became pregnant with my daughter, who's now 7.
Okay. A lot of things.
Yeah.
So where are you when you're pregnant with your daughter?
So I was single. The father never wanted to be a part of the relationship, and I was living with my aunt.
And you were doing what?
I was doing nothing. I was just...
So what happened to the driven Melissa?
Was completely just intoxicated. Was just totally...
And you knew that or didn't know that?
No, I part of me was just dead. And then like the part of me that was like wanted to succeed and that would come out on the other side was just laying completely dormant. Was just, but I would always check into church. So I would just like show up at church randomly for like once a year. And just, I feel like I got enough prayer and enough just to keep me alive and functioning. You know, I would be really down and I would turn on, TBN or those preacher channels and I would watch different preachers. And it was just like enough to keep me basically from committing suicide. And I really credit those little drips of God throughout the time. I mean, even when I was in Turkey, I showed up at the base church once just to kind of see things. And so it was that like those little bites of church that kind of kept me going at any capacity that I was at.
Were you raised in the church?
I actually wasn't. My mom, this is another fun part of my story. My mom passed away when I was 15.
Not fun, but I'm sorry.
My mom passed away when I was 15, and I kind of was introduced to mortality, and I had a friend who was a preacher's son, and I started hanging out with him, and I ended up getting baptized in his father's church. And so I kind of found God on my own at 15.
Wow. Okay. So God seems to be the commonality when you don't realize it, but you realize somebody's got to help you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Where's your aunt?
So she's still here.
When you were going through all this stuff, what was she saying to him?
Well, we have alcoholism that runs pretty strong in our family. She was just as drunk as I was.
Even par, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what happens during your pregnancy?
You know, I kept it together just enough to have my daughter.
What does that mean?
So I was just scratching and clawing to not do drugs and drink or overtake any substances, and I was miserable. I was living in absolute pain. I was working with my doctors to make sure my medications were perfect, and I kept having these panic attacks. I mean, it was devastating to have the prospect of raising a child without a father in this, hellhole of an environment that me and my aunt had created with each other. And one day when I was about 8 months pregnant, I had a really bad panic attack, and the ambulance came and picked me up.
Who called?
I did. And that also, looking back, it saved my life, but it was the beginning of a very, even more tragic period. I came into the ambulance, but there was a disconnect between my psychiatrist and the hospital where I was at. So they never contacted my psychiatrist, and being that I showed up pregnant, and I was incoherent, there was no record of my medications, so they took me off everything.
Oh.
So I basically just descended into complete, utter madness, gave birth to my daughter, wasn't even conscious to hold her or anything. So she immediately went to the NICU because I was 8 months pregnant. She was early. And so about, I would say 2 weeks later, I came to in the hospital, catatonic, so stuck in my body, unable to speak, unable to fully shower myself, and was told that my child was taken away, was, in the NICU. And so I always when I try to explain this story to people, I think about if you could imagine a cat who'd just given birth and someone took the kittens. That cat would be howling and searching and relentlessly trying to find those kittens.
Yeah.
And so that was me inside that hospital. And so it took a lot of time. I think it took another 3 weeks for me to fully, whatever stabilized meant at that point. But
are you in the hospital?
In the hospital.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in a psychiatric ward.
Did you know where you were in the hospital?
It wasn't, not for a while. Not for until maybe my last few days there. Because I had broken down so much that I can't even really recall anything rational from that time. I remember coming to and sitting in this classroom, and this lady was coaching me on how to make facial expressions again, because I had lost the ability to smile, to do anything.
Because of why?
Because I had this, I guess that's a really important question. So being taken off my medication, it really messed with my brain chemistry in a very serious way. Then giving birth to my daughter, there's a thing called postpartum psychosis, which is a step down the line than postpartum depression. So I had postpartum psychosis and another psychiatric break. So all of those things together, having my child physically removed from my person, just created this completely downward spiral that I could have died, one, and two, there was no hope for me to regain any semblance of actual life. Like I could have just been like a borderline vegetable for the rest of my life.
And why weren't you?
Just there's this hunger and this insatiability to quit that I won't die. I won't go towards that place until I feel like it's the right time. I don't know exactly what it was, but I know it has a lot to do with God and, you know, not having a family. There was a lot of times where I shouldn't have made it. And their only other explanation for me would be God, would be like angels intervening, because nothing else makes sense.
Okay, so all these doctors, are they talking to each other? Is like anybody leading the band that like helped Melissa?
They didn't actually until towards the end. They finally figured out, because I don't even think they knew I was a veteran or that I was working with the VA or anything like that for a while. So finally, my doctor got involved.
Okay, wait. Where's your aunt?
She was at home.
The whole
time?
Drinking
still.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, she was at home drinking still. And, you know, to her credit, we both came from terrible upbringings with the same family members who, you know, gave us a shoddy deck of cards and bad genetics. So to her credit, everybody who's drinking, we're doing the best we can to deal with some kind of issue. So I don't blame her or have any negative feelings towards her, because she was doing the best she could at the time.
So you're in the hospital.
Yep.
They don't know, like, you're a veteran.
Yep.
Finally figure it out?
Yes.
Okay. And you go to rehab in the hospital, or?
So at that point, I didn't go to rehab. I just was let out of the hospital.
They said, have a nice day. Yeah.
Yeah, basically. But I started working with my therapist, and I just had a desire to get better. Mm-hmm. I knew that I could, and I would look around and know that this wasn't the life for me. I mean, I was having trouble showering. I was having trouble just doing the basic things like brushing my teeth. And I was slowly re-educating myself on how to do these basic things. I ended up getting my own apartment, and that's when I started on the vocational school route, trying to better myself and figure out what the next step was going to be. And so introducing more structure into my life. And it was when, it wasn't until my daughter was a year old until I actually got fully sober.
Do you recognize that you can't brush your teeth or take a shower? Does it compute that something happened?
It didn't at the time. I would be like, it would be like 5 days had passed, and I'm like, oh my gosh, where have I been? What have I been doing? And so after I got when I got sober, that's when I had this moment of clarity where I looked around my apartment. It was completely trashed, completely destroyed. And I was like, what's going on? I can't live like this anymore. So this is just the fire that was just given to me by the Lord. I just got up one day, put on some old raggedy running shoes, and just started walking down the street and just said, I'm going to start walking. I got sober that day. I showed up in an AA meeting, like 290 pounds, just a hot mess. But was just there and said, like, showed up and was like, okay, I'm ready to try to figure this out. Okay,
so they welcome you and you tell your story, like, screwed up, or they say, hi, honey, how can I help you?
Yeah, so I saw my sponsor, and she's this very tall, very cheery blonde woman. And it looked like there was just a beacon of light over her when I walked in. And she just is smiling, and I walked up to her and I asked her, like, will you be my sponsor? Because she just looked like she just totally had it together and just seemed very anointed. And I was like, okay, I want to work with her. And so she took me through the 12 steps. And really just was there for me and nurtured me and stepped in as this motherly figure where I had none at the time. So much to the point where, like, I call her my soul mother. She calls me her soul daughter. And so at that time I most needed a mother, she showed up and was able to kind of walk me through and peel back all the layers of trauma and why I had gotten to the place where I was at. Why am I actually drinking? Okay, let me get a good therapist who's actually going to listen to me. And, you know, that's what I did.
Okay, so tell me about your mother.
So my mother, she came from a family where my grandmother had been married 5 or 6 times. So she had a challenging upbringing on herself. So she was much like me. She joined the military to try to get out of that life of the, you know, living in a trailer, you know, met different men all over the place. She joined the military to get out of that. And so in the 80s, for a woman to join the Army, I think that just shows a level of grit and amazingness that we can't really comprehend now, or that I can't even comprehend, because I know how challenging it was for me in the Air Force, you know, in a modern day. So she joined the military, meets my dad, and my dad was, you know, very verbally abusive to everybody he ever knew. And so she kind of put up with that for a while, had me. She got sober when she found out she was pregnant with me. So she also had alcoholism. And so spent the rest of my childhood in AA meetings, which is where I learned about AA as a small child. So when everything fell apart, I knew where to go.
Did you realize that as a child what your mom was doing?
So I realized that she was sober, and I realized what was going on. I mean, I was like a 6-year-old child, like crawling around on the floor of an AA meeting, like drinking coffee. So, and they would say, like, it's better to have your kid in an AA meeting than in a bar. And it's like, okay, if those are our choices, then sure.
Wow.
So I heard a lot of, you know, wild drinking stories and a lot of stuff that most children shouldn't be and aren't exposed to. But it did lay that AA foundation. I knew the Lord's Prayer. I knew the Serenity Prayer from, you know, very small. And it was always in the back of my mind that I could go there. So
when you went there, what were you thinking?
Thank God.
No, when you were drinking. Like, you heard all about all these stories as a kid from your mom, and now you're going to live it. There was a period of your life where you were living it.
Right.
Did it dawn on you, like, I'm not supposed to be doing this?
It didn't. It didn't. I really was so enthralled in the addiction and really saw it as the only way of existing. Did you have compassion for your mom at that point? I do now. After going through the program, after doing a lot of work with the relationship I had with my father, and like considering, like, wow, what did she have to go through? Yeah. So yeah, I do now. Okay, so your sponsor, why did you pick her? Or did she pick you? I think we picked each other. Because she never sponsored anyone else after she sponsored me. And she wasn't like the super duper AA sponsor lady. Like we had this very unique relationship, and we kind of worked the steps in our own way even. We brought in outside books, and we started reading this book called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. So that was part of my sobriety. So we just did things differently. And I saw she, you know, the way she lived her life. She was an RN. She had 3 children, and she was just optimal. She was just being a full-blown human being. And that's what I was trying to do. Did she introduce you to her family? Yeah, I had met her husband and her kids a couple times, but it was mainly just about like our relationship. Okay, so
You're on the road to recovery, walking 100 miles?
Yeah, basically.
Okay, going back to school?
Yeah, so right when I got sober, I signed up for aesthetic school. And so that's where a new level of healing that's where healing started to happen.
Because why?
Because
what is it about that industry?
Well, it's very intimate, like doing a facial, you have somebody's head just cradled, in your hands, and the conversations that come out of it, you hear about everything in anybody's life.
Like you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, little pieces of this story come out all the time with my clients, or they did. And so also the power of human touch, like to receive facials. So in school, I received a ton of facials because that's what we're doing. And I performed a ton of facials. So it was just very healing. And I didn't even really at the time know that's what was happening. But that's what my soul needed at that moment to kind of come out of addiction to ultimate self-care. So I'd gone from not showering and brushing my teeth to this extreme form of self-care. And I feel like it was healing. It was needed, and it was healing all those parts of me.
Okay, so where's your daughter?
So at the time, she was with a family who had adopted her. I had decided at the time that with the addiction, I didn't feel like she deserved to go through that.
Okay, so how does a girl who's not right in her head decide that?
Well, we were doing I was doing this, it's called a kinship placement. So basically what was happening is they were giving me time to kind of heal and work with my doctors and do all these different things like therapy and letting my medication work. So this was supposed to be a very temporary arrangement. So my daughter would go with them on the weekends and she'd be with me during the week, and it was supposed to be very temporary. But there was a time where she ended up staying with them for a little bit longer because I wasn't making progress. And so
who was judging your progress? The system or you?
So the system was involved, but it was a different type. It wasn't foster care, it was a kinship placement. So they were involved, but I ultimately made the choice for her to be adopted. I decided to let go because she came to visit me in the hospital. They brought her to see me, and they brought her in, and she looked at me, and then she turned away. And I said, I won't do that to her. And that was it. I said, I'm done. And said, you guys have to take her. You guys have to raise her. And we kept a very open relationship. It was an open adoption. We stayed in contact, and eventually they realized at this point I had met my fiance, fast forwarding a little bit, met my fiance, we're in an open adoption. I always thought it would just be an open adoption. I never thought that I would now be parenting her. I didn't know that that's what was going to happen. So I had just made peace with that, and here I am with my fiance, and that's how it's going to be. But they started to understand that I had completely changed my life and I was a productive human being. Okay,
so do you have a personal relationship with this family at that point?
Yep, I always did. Even in the beginning I did, because we were co-parenting her from the beginning.
But they were strangers to you?
So they were the friends of my neighbors. So this is really a really interesting aspect. When I was in the hospital and, my biological parents refused to come see my daughter in the NICU when they knew, my aunt's at home drinking, she had heard from my aunt's friend at work that there was a baby in the NICU. And she just dropped everything and went and started holding her in the NICU. Just was like, what? There's a baby that no one's like, and she just left work and just came down and started holding my daughter.
Okay, so you see that there is love there.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to guess love that you never had seen.
To this day, there's nothing that really compares to her doing that.
Okay, so they raise her.
Yeah, so they had her, and blend her.
What's
Melody?
Her name?
Melody.
Thank you.
Yeah, so they were taking care of Melody for a few years, and after I met my husband, Trista, who is the mom who I now co-parent with, she came over and met with me and Justin and kind of sat with us and was just like hanging out and like, what's going on and how are you? And so at that point, Melody had started to become a little challenging for them as a child in their house. And I just know it's because she has my DNA and she's, willful and wild, just like I've always been. And so we started to hear through just little comments like, oh, what do I do? She's, a little bit out of control. There was just a room for me to step in. But
so the roles were essentially switched. Like your Melody's living in my house, but you're helping.
She would come to me, like call me and ask me how to deal with certain things. And so Melody started asking about me because this is a white family. My daughter is not white. And she would start asking where did I come from? Like, how am I here? And basically they ended up telling her about me. And she started
with your permission, or
it was always very open. There was never anything to hide. There was never anything. But when she started to become aware, that's when we really were like, we just got to let her be involved and let her know what's going on. So she started at 4 years old demanding to FaceTime me. And so Trista asked me, she's like, will you FaceTime? I'm like, yeah, of course I will. So we started FaceTiming every day, and it was like we had known each other. We'd never not been mother and daughter. It was just very natural. And so they invited me and my fiance, who's now my husband at the time, to her 5th birthday party. And at the birthday, we just thought we were going to show up at the birthday party, hang out, just do that and leave. And we were totally prepared to do that. We were prepared to be in her life more, maybe coming to parties and stuff like that. But they sat us down and said, what do you think about taking custody again? And I just lost it, just cried. Of course.
I'm losing it right now. Okay.
Yeah. So they said, what do you think about taking custody? Immediately, of course, yes. Yes, I will. Yes. When do we do this? So immediately we started a transition process, and, it's been almost 3 years at this point.
Do you see that family?
Yeah, so we have a very, very close relationship because Melody for me, has always been her development is what's important, which is why I chose to let go when I did, when she was a baby. They're still in her life. I'd never tried to sever that relationship, and I won't, just because it would be so devastating to her as a child. So we co-parent. She goes there every other weekend. And sometimes once a month, but, she'll go, spend their, little family parties and birthday parties, and everybody's on the same page, on the same team. And we have a really beautiful relationship.
Okay. Who do you attribute your turnaround in life? Okay, I know God, but there had to have been somebody along the way that said, okay, Melissa, I'm going to stand behind you.
Oh, my husband. My husband, for sure. I met my husband 6 months sober. He was already 5 years sober. And we just started talking one day, and then we've been together for over 5 years now. So it was him who I had started just being upfront. When I got sober, I just started being upfront and honest about my story and everything I'd been through. To anybody.
Okay.
Just because I was kind of done, hiding. And I was honest with him. He was honest with me about his past and things that he had been through. And it was the first time where I was able to really actually love somebody who wasn't going to leave.
And how did he peel the onions, the layers of the onion off of you?
Well, I don't think he had to, because I was just a raw nerve. So it was just like, here's all my stuff. Like, here's what's going on. Here's everything, it just all came out.
Okay. And mentally, he just accepted her?
Well, he realized that he didn't really have a choice because
package deal.
Exactly. And then he had a whole grieving process that he went through of just the relationship with me because, we were just planning to just do our own life together. And then all of a sudden, like, we have a 5-year-old moving in 2 months. Figure it out. And he did that because he saw in me that day that, like, a piece of me returned. And that there was nothing he could do other than he was going to be with me no matter what. He has chosen her as his own child now.
What part of this story are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of the awakening, the ability to be coherent and to do something that was never projected for me, to get the statistics, to have the statistics be wrong, to be able to enjoy very small things and still look at the totality of everything I've gone through and say, wow, I'm doing pretty good. I'm proud that I can be in a family, considering how dysfunctional all my family examples were. So I'm proud that I'm still trying, and I'm proud that I never gave up and that I don't intend to. And that also, like, objectively, there's a lot of bizarre and wild experiences that I've gone through. A lot that I can't even really articulate because it sounds almost false. So I kind of, to know those things about myself and still be able to, like, get it, get up, get it together and come sit here. Like, I'm proud of that. And there's this.
You should be.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a scripture that basically talks about someone going through the fire and at the end not even smelling like smoke. And that's how I feel. Like, I'll introduce somebody to a very small part of my story and they're like, wow, I could never imagine that. And that's what I was going to say, yeah, God, number one, because anything else, no other human explanation exists.
So being an esthetician, touching one person at a time were you called for that?
I was called for that in that season, I believe. I was called for that to kind of restore a piece of me and to become social again. I had drank in isolation and lived my life in isolation for years between getting out of the military and the time I got sober. So I didn't even know how to, like, interact with people. So it was time for me just to, like, get around other women and, like, just get to know day to day how to function, how to behave as a civilian, not in the military. So it was huge for that. I enjoy it. It's a lovely thing.
So you say the season. Now what is your season?
I'm trying to discover what the season is. I went from doing some work in spas to running my own facial company and deciding to transition out of that. So I'm just looking for the next opportunity and trying to keep myself open to alternative endings and different outcomes that I can't even see yet. And
for a driven girl, that's hard.
Very hard.
Yeah.
Very hard.
And will you share your story with your daughter?
Absolutely.
At what age?
She hears every little piece of it that she can comprehend now. My rule is, if she's smart enough to ask the question, if she can formulate and articulate a question, I will answer it honestly to her.
How is it received? Do you think she can comprehend all this?
I think she can understand to her level of maturity. And next, each time she asks another question, it gets revealed. There was a certain point where she thought she was some kind of immaculate conception because she didn't know that there was a dad that wasn't in the picture. And I was like, I guess I forgot to mention that this is how you came to be. But she was just astonished that there was a man that was there that wasn't there. So just something like that, when she was smart enough and aware enough to ask the question, I'm going to tell her what it is. Because I don't want her to live in some kind of like cloak of like secrecy, because it's going to make me act weird too, because I'm going to be trying to, keep things from her.
So I'm going to guess that is how you were raised.
Yes.
So you and she are going to break the channel?
Yeah, that's a generational curse that's being broken.
Yeah. Will you tell her that alcoholism runs in your family?
I cannot wait to tell her about this. I will until it's appropriate for her when she starts getting exposed to alcohol. But I can't wait to instill in her the knowledge, and I'm going to have her watch documentaries. Like, I'm going to be very detailed in the science of things. And if she chooses the other way, if she chooses to get involved with alcohol, she'll at least have a very thorough foundation of what addiction is, what it looked like for our family, and how it plays out in real life.
So the addiction, the bipolar, you want to share all that with her?
I do, because I think she needs to know who I am just as much as like anyone else I meet need to know who I am. I want her to know who I am like as a real person. So me and her can actually have a real relationship.
You're a strong mom. Yeah. Are you proud of that?
I think sometimes I'm just too close to it to really, I think I'll be proud when I see that it worked, because there's still a chance that, it's an experiment still.
For you or her?
For both of us. Just trying to figure out like what's going to work for her, what's going to work for me.
What do you think is going to work for you?
As long as she's just a functioning adult.
You.
I think there's going to be a point, and I think I'm getting close to that, where I'm restored to my original factory settings. So where I was, the potential that was maybe driven out of me over the years, I feel really close to finding that position or that industry that's going to click and allow me to have another period of long, successful run of being productive and contributing to society.
And she will become you by example. So you have to be proud of that.
I am.
I applaud you, and I applaud you for the courage of telling your story, because everybody has a story, but everybody fails. Well, in some point in their life, and whether you can share that or not and live in secrecy, right, bears a burden all of your life. So your bipolar, the PTSD, the drinking, you have saved, just today, you have touched so many people. And I am more than thankful for that. And I think you should be proud.
Yeah. I am.
So thank you for being here, sharing your story, and I want to hear more. How about that?
Yeah, I'll be available.
To be continued.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Do you have a story to share? I'd love to hear from you. Please visit LoriCorken.com. There you will find more stories like the one you heard today with our series, The Power of a Voice.